It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. The Organization of American States, the OAS, voted in favor of a resolution condemning Venezuela. The resolution passed with 19 member countries voting in favor, 4 against, and 11 abstaining. It decided that the May 20th presidential elections in Venezuela could be deemed illegitimate and calls on Venezuela to accept humanitarian aid. Also, it calls on member states to take unspecified political, economic, and financial measures to assist in the restoration of democratic order in Venezuela. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo argued in favor of the resolution. Let's listen.
In addition to suspension, I call on fellow member states to apply additional pressure on the Maduro regime, including sanctions and further diplomatic isolation, until such time as it undertakes the actions necessary to return genuine democracy and provide people desperately needed access to international humanitarian aid. We call on all OAS nations to do this today regarding Venezuela and in the future, wherever necessary, for good of the region and the world.
Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arriaza responded as follows.
La agresión contra Venezuela es brutal, es económica, es financiera, es comercial, es política, es mediática. Y nosotros vamos a seguir adelante. Y es nuestro pueblo el que elige su presidente, no son los gobiernos, no es Estados Unidos, no es ninguna institución internacional la que elige el presidente de Venezuela. El presidente de Venezuela se llama Nicolás Maduro Moros y fue elegido con el 68% del apoyo popular en las elecciones del 20 de mayo. Y demandamos el reconocimiento de nuestro pueblo exclusivamente. No nos importa si Estados Unidos reconoce o no reconoce, o si cualquier gobierno que esté aquí sentado reconoce o no reconoce. Y nosotros somos una nación independiente, una nación libre, soberana, y ningún imperio va a poner su pie en territorio venezolano y va a impedir que el pueblo venezolano cumpla con su voluntad, cumpla con su democracia y cumpla con su destino de libertad. Muchas gracias.
Joining me now to discuss the OAS resolution on Venezuela and the process by which it passed is Mark Weisbrot. Mark is the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research and is the author of the book Failed: What Experts Got Wrong About the Global Economy. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Sharmini.
All right, Mark. Now, originally, the U.S. wanted to suspend Venezuela from the OAS, but to do so, it needed 24 votes, which it did not have. So instead, the OAS passed this resolution with 19 votes. How serious is the resolution and what are its implications?
Yes, well, I mean, from the U.S. point of view, it did fail because they don't have the 24 votes that they need to actually suspend Venezuela. And so they were putting a lot of pressure on those countries that abstained. And they decided to abstain rather than vote against because there was such enormous pressure. You had open statements from Pence, from the ambassador or U.S. ambassador to the OAS, Trujillo, and from Marco Rubio, all threatening countries with various things, consequences, if they didn't line up with the U.S. on this vote. And it was quite striking. I mean, I heard all kinds of stories from diplomats there, but these guys confirmed it all in public, how they threaten people and countries. And Haiti was a good example. They still abstained, even though Rubio singled them out and has done that for a while. And threatening, you can imagine they will pay a price for that, for abstaining on this vote. It was the abstentions that mattered. The vote itself, again, they needed the 24 votes to show that they could actually go on to suspend.
All right, Mark, you know, in Latin America, the OAS is often known as the Ministry of Colonies in a dig at how the U.S. uses and flexes its muscles at the OAS to push its own agenda in Latin America. How is the U.S. using OAS in this case for its agenda? Give us some examples of how the U.S. flexes its muscles.
Yeah, this is really an extreme example, although there have been many in the past. And it really shows, I mean, it really is a colonial organization. I mean, so is the IMF and the World Bank, but this one is so blatant, where the U.S. ambassador there just spends 2 hours on the floor going around telling people, we're watching your vote. And they have all kinds of threats they can use. People have families, the ambassadors who need visas, and they go out of the country, they might not be able to come back. All kinds of, they want jobs here, they want residency, all threats and bribes, and they can do all these things. And the threaten the governments, of course, with withdrawal of aid is more serious. But they do all of these things. And it really, it appears to be a multilateral organization, but then when you see what's done in cases like this, and they've done this many times before. So, for example, in Haiti in 2000, Haiti had an election, and the OAS released its initial report, and they said it was a great success for the Haitian population. That's an actual quote. And then the U.S. intervened, and they changed their report. And then they participated in this 4-year effort to overthrow the Haitian government, which was, by delegitimizing it. The OAS was used to do that. And then by pretending the election wasn't fair. And then they overthrew the government in broad daylight in 2004, as you remember. And then they did another thing in like this in 2011. Where they actually did something that no electoral observer mission has ever done. They reversed the results of the election. And then the Obama administration actually threatened Haiti with a cutoff of aid, desperately needed aid right after the earthquake, if they didn't accept the OAS's election results. And that was without a recount or a statistical analysis or anything, just decided who the winner of the first round of the presidential election should be. And they got away with that with Haiti more easily because, Haiti is mostly black and poor, and they can get away with it. But you can see Haiti is still, the Caribbean states are the most militant in opposing this kind of abuse and manipulation of the OAS because of their, history of slavery. So they still have a lot of things they can't win. But they make it so obvious that this really isn't about democracy or human rights in Venezuela. I mean, you just had an election in November where in Honduras, which we've talked about here, where the election was stolen. And the Secretary General of the OAS, Almagro, who's the leader of this effort, he actually said it, that you had to have a new election, that this wasn't believable at all. And then, of course, he backed off when the U.S. government, the Trump administration, made up their mind. And there's so many examples of this. And obviously, it really doesn't have anything to do with what goes on in Venezuela. What it has to do with is that the United States is openly trying to topple the Venezuelan government, and it's using the OAS as its instrument. And they may even use this vote as an excuse or a pretext for their most loyal allies, the right-wing governments of Chile and Argentina, to break diplomatic relations with Venezuela. I think that was one of the purposes of this vote. And of course, the attempt to suspend Venezuela from the OAS, because they're leaving anyway. So what's the rush?
Finally, Mark, the same day as the OAS resolution on Venezuela was passed, Foreign Policy magazine ran an article openly calling for a coup in Venezuela with the title, "It's Time for a Coup in Venezuela." Exactly that. Now, I understand that we are in a very, very difficult time in Venezuela, but calling for a coup is a little exaggerated, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word, but what do you make of this suggestion?
Well, the author is an extremist, I think, but it's not. It is pretty much the official policy of the Trump administration. There's been statements from other officials saying that the military should intervene. Rubio has said something like that, and he's, as I said, he's pretty much in charge of policy in Latin America for the Trump administration. So it is a really unusual thing. I mean, you go back to the coup in Chile in 1973 even, and they didn't say it in advance. They supported the coup after it happened. They usually do these things quietly and behind the scenes, and they don't, openly call for it. Although the Republicans did support the coup in Honduras, but again, they didn't call it a coup. And of course, Hillary worked to establish and consolidate the coup government when she was Secretary of State in 2009. But again, they would never call for the overthrow by the military of an elected government like this. And that's, the masks are off. They're just saying whatever they want. And I think they will pay a price for it up the road, and especially this manipulation of the OAS. I mean, the creation of CELAC in 2010 was a response to U.S. manipulation of the OAS after the coup in Honduras, to prevent the OAS from taking stronger measures to restore the democratically elected president. And I think you will see a response up the road. They're not going to control the politics of Latin America or have all these right-wing allies indefinitely. In fact, they may lose one in just a few weeks in Mexico.
Mark, the resolution itself called on member states to take very unspecified political actions and economic actions and financial measures. Sounds like code for something. What is your interpretation?
Well, they want cooperation in the financial embargo, which is the Trump administration's now main strategy for toppling the government of Venezuela. Because, I mean, of course, they didn't create the mess there, but if Venezuela were to try and get out of it, it makes it extremely difficult because they can't borrow. And in fact, they are depriving, and a number of people have written about this, I mean, they are depriving the country of medicines by cutting off credit in the way that they're doing. They're not specifically targeting those loans, but a lot of financial institutions tend to err on the side of conservatism when there is a financial embargo that's being enforced by the United States and there's serious punishments. They won't loan money for all kinds of things. So they are really doing everything to topple the government through worsening the economic situation, which is already terrible. And they want more Latin American countries to join in that and try to legitimate that.
Mark, Venezuela is already under very dire circumstances as a result of the sanctions that are already in place. This action can hamper the situation even more. Tell us about the sanctions and the impact that this resolution is going to have on the economy of Venezuela.
Yes, well, the economy was already in a very bad state, and well, with the financial embargo, they have a terrible depression and hyperinflation. But what the financial embargo does is it makes all that worse, because the Trump financial embargo, because it makes it impossible for them to borrow on most international financial markets, and also to restructure their debt, which would be another part of the recovery. And it's important, and I think this is one of the ironies of them trying to use the Organization of American States to expand this financial embargo, because the embargo itself is a violation of the OAS charter, and it's a violation of other international conventions and treaties that the U.S. is a signatory to.
All right, Mark, so much more to discuss, including the situation of the inflation and the economic crisis that Venezuela is undergoing at the moment. We'll pick that up next week. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, Sharmini.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.